Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bible Basics with Pastor Steve. We don't have a whole lot of folks on here yet, but I'm sure they'll well, I know some folks are on vacation, but I know that we'll have some folks with us anyway. So please say hi in the comments. Let us know who you are, where you're watching from. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the Book of Ruth. I know I had initially said that I was going to break it down to smaller chunks, but looking at it today, I said, nah, I can't do that. I'm going to put the whole thing in one lesson, one paraphrasing. Hopefully you got it today. Had a lot of fun paraphrasing it, and we'll find out. You'll find out why when we get into the reflections portion tonight. We're doing a survey of the Bible 1 week at a time, one story at a time. Good evening, Mike and Kim here in Frederick. John Ewan's here in Hagerstown. Good to have you here. One critical Bible story at a time. I strongly suggest reading them ahead of time, and if you get on the mailing list, emailing that below, you'll get your little reminder each Tuesday afternoon that tonight we're having study. And of course, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll get notifications there. And if you follow me on Facebook, you'll get notifications there as well. Jeff and Kathy Long are here in Myersville. Jerry Keplinger is here this evening. Welcome, guys. All right, so next week, I'm going to be on vacation again. Hey, Charles. I'm going to be on vacation again next week, so we will be taking a break again next week. I haven't decided whether I'm going to come back in August or in, is that right? I may take a break between now and September, but I will let you know. I'll send you an email letting you know what I'm going to do. I've not planned past next week's vacation time yet, but I see it's kind of hard to get started with something when you've got all these little breaks coming in there or something, and maybe we'll just start the next book after my second vacation week, whenever that, I don't remember. Becky plans this stuff. We're not going anywhere anyway. Hello, Tracy. At any rate, watch your inboxes, and I will let you know what is going on. But we will not be meeting next week, maybe the week after, not sure. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a word of prayer, shall we? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, let's get started with Ruth. This is a paraphrasing. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine. A man from Bethlehem went to Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. His name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. They moved to Moab and settled there. Elimelech eventually died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. They married 2 Moabite women named Orpah and Ruth. After about 10 years, the brothers died. Naomi decided to return to her homeland because she heard that the Lord God had provided a good harvest. She set out for the land of Judah with her 2 daughters-in-law. On the way, Naomi tried to convince them to turn back. Go back to your parents. I pray that the Lord God will treat you as well as you has treated my family. May God give you each a new husband and home. She kissed them, and they all cried. They argued with her. But she said, go back. Why do you want to go with me? I'm all out of sons, and I'm too old to start a new family. Even if I did, by the time they grew up, you'd be too old to marry them. Go home. The Lord God has turned against me. Orpah kissed her goodbye and left, but Ruth wouldn't leave. She said, I will go where you go. I will live where you live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. I will die where you die, and I will be buried where you are buried. May God punish me if I let anything separate us, even death. When Naomi saw how determined she was, she stopped arguing with her. So they both went to Bethlehem, and when they arrived, everyone asked, is this Naomi? She said, don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because the Almighty has dealt with me bitterly. The Lord has brought me home empty-handed. It was the beginning of the barley harvest. Ruth said to Naomi, I'm going to see if I can glean in someone's field. She went and gleaned in the field after the harvesters, and she happened to be in the field of a man named Boaz. Boaz was wealthy and was related to Naomi's late husband. Boaz came out to the field and greeted the harvesters. "May the Lord be with you." They answered, "And also with you." Then he asked the overseer, "Who is the young lady?" He said, "It's that Moabite woman who lives with Naomi. She asked if she could follow along and glean. She has been at it all morning without taking a break." Boaz said to Ruth, "Don't glean in any other field, and stay close to my girls. My men will make sure no one touches you. And help yourself to our water whenever you get thirsty." Ruth bowed down and said, "Why are you being so nice to a foreigner like me?" And Boaz replied, "I've heard how much you've done for Naomi. You left behind your family and your homeland to look after her. You're under the Lord's protection now, and I pray that he will reward you for everything you've done." At mealtime, Boaz insisted that she eat with his workers. Then he told them to let her glean in areas that hadn't been harvested yet, and to drop some intentionally for her to glean it. At the end of the day, when she beat out what she'd gleaned, she had about a bushel of barley. When Naomi saw how well she'd done, she asked where she'd been gleaning. Ruth told her it was Boaz's field, and Naomi said, "God bless him. He's a close relative of ours." Ruth continued to glean in Boaz's field through the barley harvest and then through the wheat harvest. At the end of the season, Naomi said to Ruth, "Get yourself cleaned up, put on your best clothes and some perfume. Tonight at the threshing floor, hang out until after dinner. When Boaz goes to bed, slide under the covers with him. Then he will tell you what to do." Boaz woke up at midnight and realized he had a woman in bed with him. He said, "Who are you?" She said, "It's Ruth. Let me stay. You have a legal claim on me." He said, "God bless you. You could have had a younger, richer man, but you're here out of loyalty to Naomi. There's actually another man who is more closely related to her, but he has a stronger claim. But if he doesn't exercise his right, so help me God, I will. So stay here until morning." She spent the night, but following his advice, she left early enough that no one would recognize her. He had her fill her cloak with grain before she left. When she got home, Naomi asked how it went. Ruth told her everything, and Naomi said, "He won't rest until he has this taken care of." Boaz went to the city gate and waited for the man he had been talking about. When he came along, Boaz said, "Come here and sit, my friend." Boaz gathered the town elders and said to the man, "Naomi, who has recently returned from Moab, is selling her husband's land. As her closest relative, you have the right of first refusal. Do you want to buy it? If not, I'm next in line and I want it." Boaz continued, he said, "I will buy it." And Boaz continued, "If you do buy it, you'll need to marry Ruth. That keeps the land in Elimelech's name, not yours." The man replied, "Well, that would put the future of my estate at risk. I can't do it. You can buy it." Boaz told the elders, "You are my witnesses. I have bought Elimelech's estate from Naomi. That includes Ruth the Moabite, who will become my wife. Her first husband's name will continue on the land." So Boaz married Ruth, and they had a son. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord God for giving you a family. Your grandson will be famous in Israel. He will give you a new life and take care of you in your old age. Your daughter-in-law is worth 7 sons." Naomi loved the boy and raised him as if he were her own. They named him Obed, but everyone called him Naomi's boy. Obed was the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. Yes, that David. Hello, Roseanne. Good to have you with us tonight. Lot to talk about in this. And by the way, Oprah Winfrey is named after Orpah, but they misspelled the name on the birth certificate. So to understand a lot of what's going on here, there's some things you need to know about the ancient world, ancient Israel in particular, that most of you probably wouldn't know. First of all, there's this concept of a redeemer. You know, I remember when Becky and I went up to New England back in the 90s before children. We were on vacation, and it was great. We took old US Route 1 and just drove up the coast. We had no agenda, had no reservations anywhere. Just wanted to see everything along the road and find places to stay and things to do. And we had a great time. Hello, Joan. And once we got up into New England, we started seeing all these signs for redemption centers, and we thought they were having some kind of a revival or something. Little did we know the glass bottles could still be redeemed for 5 cents up there. I don't know if they still count or not, but back then you took your bottles back to the redemption center. I remember that from when I was a kid. We used to take our Coke bottles back to the grocery store and get them redeemed, and that's what redemption means. It means to pay the ransom to get something back, okay? So there was this notion in ancient Israel that everybody had a redeemer. The Hebrew word, I think, was goel. And don't quote me on that. My Hebrew's bad. So everybody had a redeemer. It was generally your closest related male relative. So if I was kidnapped, my redeemer would be responsible for finding me and paying the ransom. If I was murdered, my redeemer would be responsible for avenging my death. Basically, whenever I get in a bind, my Redeemer is responsible. One of the things the Redeemer was responsible for was ensuring that person's bloodline. So if I died without a male heir to carry on my line and to manage my property when I died, the closest male relative's responsibility then would be to provide a male heir for me with my widow. Okay, it was called levirate marriage. So if my widow then had a child fathered by the Redeemer, it would not be considered to be the Redeemer's child. It would be considered to be my child, and my property would pass to him. And even though he biologically was this other person's, he would be considered my son, and the property would go down, continue to be through my line. And the way property worked in ancient Israel was that each tribe had a property allotment, and then each tribe would take that property. You can look in a study Bible and you can see the map of where the tribes were located. Each tribe then would redivide its own land among the clans and so forth as needed by the families. So bigger families got bigger portions of land to farm. And every 50 years, they would redivide the land to make sure that, as family sizes changed, they would make sure that everybody had what they needed. And when that happened, the tribe reassumed. So every 50 years was called the year of the Jubilee. All the debts would be canceled, and all the land would revert back to the tribe. And in most cases, that meant reverting back to a family. So if you bought land, you didn't get to keep it indefinitely. You only got to keep it until the next Jubilee. So the closer you were to the next Jubilee, the less land was worth, because really you weren't buying land. You were renting it from the tribe, right? Or you were renting it from a person who was sort of, I guess you'd say, it's like subletting almost, okay? Because ultimately the tribe owned the land. So that's what's going on here. So, Naomi is married to Elimelech. Elimelech has a land allotment, and they've abandoned the land to go to Moab, which is a different country, not just a different area, but a different country. They went there because he couldn't grow enough food on his land. There was a famine, a drought. So they abandoned the land. It was still his. They went to Moab, started over. He died. The sons died. The sons left 2 wives without male heirs. So Naomi and one of the daughters-in-laws comes back to retake the land, but she can't use the land. It's just the 2 of them. We're assuming that Naomi is, at least middle-aged at this point. The 2 women can't work the land on their own. They don't have any children. They don't have any hired hands, any of that stuff. So they can't work the land. So she's planning to sell the land. In the meantime, they need food to live off of. So Ruth is going to go gleaning. Now, this is one of the great things. So you're learning a lot about the law. People think that the law of the Old Testament is boring and harsh, but in fact it's beautiful and very pragmatic. So, all that land stuff was part of the law. It was very important. It preserved society. It preserved families. Another aspect of it was how farms got harvested. So if you owned a field that was full of grain, one thing you could not do is harvest along the roadside. So there was a buffer along every road where the grain would remain on the stalks so that travelers could pick the grain as they walked and consume it. That was considered to be a sort of communal property for the poor, for refugees, for travelers, and so forth. Another thing you were not allowed to do is when you harvested your land, you were only allowed to go over it once. You weren't allowed to go back over it again to see what you had missed. Anything that you had missed or dropped, you were required to leave there, because the poor of the land, who did not own land and were not hired to be harvesters, would then follow along and try to pick up the leavings. Okay, so when Boaz finds out that one of his relatives is gleaning his field, he actually instructs them, A, look after her, because women out gleaning alone were very vulnerable, and B, feed her, C, make sure she gets water, and D, if she catches up with the harvesters and starts to go past them to where they haven't harvested yet, just let her do it. In fact, do me a favor and drop stuff for her to pick up. Okay, so he's very intentionally looking after her, but in a way that's not going to look overtly like charity to her. So that's what's going on with all of that. So you might notice that the way this plays out, Ruth is basically being treated as part of her late husband's estate, and that is correct. So she's attached to the land. By marrying her, Boaz is being that redeemer, and he's saying that whatever male children we have will not be my children, but will be Elimelech's grandson, and the land will continue under that lineage, and will not be going to my son. And he's probably got more than one wife. We don't know that, but so the properties will not be commingled. In other words, now what happened on the threshing floor that night is a very hot topic of debate. So when I paraphrased it. I paraphrased it as she slid into the covers with him. That's not exactly what it says. The wording is interesting. It says that at first she uncovered his feet, and when she says, and so the way I worded it, she slid under the covers with him, and when he realized she was there, she says, "Let me stay the night." The more precise wording would be that she uncovered his feet, and when he realized it, she asked him to throw his blanket over her for the night, and he agreed and said, "Yeah, stay the night here." So what is going on here? Now, if you read conservative study Bibles, they will say adamantly that nothing inappropriate is going on here. There's nothing sexual about any of this. And that's just hogwash, because any mainstream study Bible, and certainly any secular scholarship on this will tell you, and one says this exact sentence: this section is thick with sexual innuendo. One of the odd things about the Bible, the Old Testament rather, is that it uses euphemisms for guy parts in many places, and one of the euphemisms is feet. Okay, so when it says that she exposed his feet, it's not talking about 10 toes. So yeah, stuff's going on the threshing floor. Now, was this inappropriate though? Well, remember that things worked differently in those days. We know absolutely nothing about wedding ceremonies from the ancient world. We know some of the rituals and practices. We know that there was generally speaking, normally a lengthy courtship period, an engagement period. We know that an engagement was considered a binding contract. But we also know that if a man had relations with a single woman, if he then, that would then be considered a marriage contract. Okay, if it was found out, especially, that would be considered a marriage contract, and he would have to either make her his wife, or he would have to pay her for divorce. And so, so one way to get married was just to move in together. Okay, that wasn't the ideal way, but it was a way of doing it, and it happened all the time. Anyway, so that's what's happening on the threshing floor. Depending on the translation you read, I'm not clear on whether or not he was drunk at the time. I don't think he was. We know that it says he ate and he drank and was merry, or others say he was contented. I don't know. He was feeling good, let's put it that way. But he definitely was happy to end up with Ruth the next morning. So the end of the story points out that this boy that they have is going to be King David's grandfather, which then means that King David, the greatest king that ever lived of Israel, was not 100% Israelite. He was 75% Israelite and 25% Moabite. What does this tell us about, which by the way implies an openness that we sometimes forget, or some interpreters would like to forget, that Israel was not as closed as some people would have us think. All right, so what does this tell us about God? Well, God is not at work explicitly in this. God is at work behind the scenes. I'd say the primary way God is at work in this is through the society that he has set up. It's certainly not a perfect society. Ruth and Naomi end up in a very bad place, and there's certainly no social security benefits in the ancient world. But there was a system set up that sort of encouraged people to do the right thing and take care of their family, and that's what eventually happens here. So, when people think about the Old Testament law, they act, it's because of some of the stuff Paul said. Paul says some pretty extreme things about the law, and he's really talking about the effect that falling short of righteous living has on people and their conscience. And but the law itself is, are there some extreme punishments in the law? Yes, and we've said before that extreme punishments are going to be common in a culture that does not have a police system or a standing army or a jail system or any way of formally dealing with dangerous people. So when dangerous people can't be segregated from the rest of society so they can't do any damage, you're going to deal with them more harshly. That's just the way it is. But most of the law is about preserving the people and their culture and their welfare, right? What is the Ten Commandments? Why are we supposed to honor our parents? And by the way, honor means take care of them as they age, be respectful to them, treat them with dignity, make sure they're cared for. Why do we do that? So it will go well with you in the land. This is about doing what is best for everybody, and the law was set up to provide a sense of justice and to promote the common welfare. All right. What does this tell us about people? Yes, Ruth is being treated like property in this story, but she's also the hero of the story. The book's named after her. And you might notice that it's really the women in the story that are in control of the story. Boaz is the rich guy who owns the field, but they're playing him like a fiddle. And it's fine. I'm not saying that in a bad way. I think that the modern world doesn't understand how much power women actually had in patriarchal societies. Now, granted, that power was all within the family structure. It was in the private sphere, not in the public sphere, right? And most societies have had this segregation between public life and private life, and the private world tended to be more matriarchal, and the public world tended to be more patriarchal. But even in societies where the private world was on the surface patriarchal, they're actually matriarchal, and most people would say that in ancient Israel, the home life was a matriarchal society, and I would say in the modern world, in patriarchal Christian families and patriarchal Christian churches that I've either been involved with or known well, they're only patriarchal on the surface. Every family I knew, every family I've ever known that had a strong patriarch, particularly the ones that were very vocal about being patriarchal and about why women can't be in charge of things. The women were actually in charge of those families. The guys just weren't smart enough to realize it. Those of us watching from the outside always understood what was going on. You guys can argue about that in the comments if you want to. Yeah, the men only thought they were in control of the house in patriarchal societies. Ideally, we would be partners, right? In most real-life situations, though, in any kind of couple, there are going to be some aspects of life where one person has the upper hand and some aspects of life when the other has the upper hand. And you would hope that on average it would balance out. And there's a way to balance things out, I think, in every type of society. Doesn't always play out that way, but that would be the ideal. Anyway, what does this tell us about our relationship with God and with each other? Well, when we set up society to mirror God's values, God is at work in those societies, whether we see it or not. Jeff says, happy wife, happy life. Yeah, there's the old expression, if you have a happy job and an unhappy wife, you have a bad life. If you have a bad job and a happy wife, you have a good life. Yeah. I'm not offering an opinion, Jeff. But you do you. Anyway, and I've certainly known people that were happy in situations that I would not have been happy in, and I've known people who were not happy in situations that I think I would have been happy in. So, the key to life is accepting the blessings that God has given you. That's the key to a happy life, anyway. So happy life is a grateful life. So, the last thing I want to talk about, what this tells us about God, our relationship with God and with each other, is this thing that Ruth says to Naomi. When Naomi is trying to talk her into going back, Charles says, in the movie about Ruth, she was to be killed by a cult when she was a child, but she had a blemish. Another child was picked to be sacrificed. I have not seen that movie. Huh. Interesting. All right, so Ruth says this thing. When Naomi's trying to get her to go back, she says something that is often read at weddings today. I will go where you go. I will live where you live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. I will die where you die, and I will be buried when you are buried. And may God punish me if I let anything separate us, even in death. Some people even use this as their wedding vows. Of course, they weren't written as wedding vows. It was written from one woman to another, and they were related by marriage, but they were not related by blood, and they were not married to each other. So this is the ideal for human relationships, I would say. The ideal. This is the epitome of unconditional love. All right, let's move on to the news. And it's getting a little late already. That was 4 chapters. One book, 4 chapters. Did the whole thing. And I did skip a few sections that I thought didn't move the story along quickly enough to be included. You can go back and find those verses and see if you agree. All right, so in Methodist news, Bishop Minerva Carcano is finally getting her day in court this summer. And when I say day in court, I'm certainly not talking about a secular court or a governmental court. I mean, she's getting a church trial. We still don't know what the charges are. We know that there are 5 of them. We do finally know that they do not have anything to do with sexual misconduct of any kind. she is certainly not the first bishop to be charged with something. That happens every now and then. I won't say it happens all the time, but it certainly happened multiple times during my career. I had said before that she was the first one to be suspended while charged, and that apparently is not actually the case. Somebody went to the trouble of digging and digging and digging. We got Methodist history nerds, and they went digging and determined that she was not the first bishop to be suspended from duties pending investigation. But they had to dig pretty deep to find somebody else. So it is extremely rare. We won't say it's never happened before, but we will say it is extremely rare. What they have confirmed is that if this actually does go to trial, as it is currently scheduled to, it will be the first time that a bishop has been charged with something that went to trial. In the past, it has always been either the bishop has accepted defeat and withdrawn, surrendered credentials, or the charges have been dropped before it went to trial, or there was a just resolution mediation reached before trial. It has never gone all the way to church trial with a bishop before in the United Methodist Church or in any of our predecessor denominations. So this will be history. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is not Methodist news. I'm going to call it Christian news. And before I say anything else, I want to remind everybody that I am not a journalist. I'm just a guy with an opinion and a cheap webcam. And when I'm talking about things that are outside of my area of expertise, as I'm about to, you do well to take my words with a grain of salt, and trust but verify, as we say. And in particular, tonight, because the facts are kind of hard to come by in this. I want to talk about the movie The Sound of Freedom, which came out on the 4th of July. Becky and Zachary and I went to see, what movie did we go to see on the 4th of July? We didn't go to see that one. We went to see the Transformers Rise of the Beasts movies. But the movie theater was packed with church groups, all of which were wearing very patriotic clothing, there to see Sound of Freedom. Now, I have not seen Sound of Freedom. I want to make that clear. I've not seen it. So right out the gate, I'm talking about something that I don't have firsthand knowledge of. Okay, it was released by Angel Studios. Angel Studios is a Mormon group, but their work has been pretty mainstream. They crowdfund the work that they do. They don't have Hollywood backing or major financial backing. In this movie, Jim Caviezel plays Tim Ballard, who is a real person. Now, Jim Caviezel, you may remember that name. Jim Caviezel played Jesus in the movie The Passion many years ago, and I believe they're working on a sequel finally that's going to be called The Resurrection. I have respect for the movie The Passion. I have a high regard for it. It's overly violent, and the violence is not realistic. They did that because they felt that modern audiences were desensitized to violence. So to be shocking as they felt it should be, they intentionally overdid it. In more recent edits of the movie, they've backed off of it a little bit. But anyway, we're not talking about The Passion tonight. That Jim Caviezel played Jesus. He's done some other stuff since then. However, in recent years, he has been a vocal proponent of the QAnon conspiracy theories. And when I say vocal proponent, I mean he goes to these conventions that they have and gives talks on the conspiracies, promoting them, okay? Now, for those of you who don't know what QAnon is, I'm sure you've all heard of it, and it's a collection of conspiracy theories. And I'm not going to go into the political aspects of it other than to say that the core of the conspiracy theory is that global corporations and governments are run by a secret organization of Satan-worshiping, cannibalistic child traffickers who use abducted children for all kinds of purposes, one of which is to manufacture And when I say manufacture, they don't have children manufacturing it. They use children in the manufacture process of a fictional narcotic that supposedly is based on the adrenaline of traumatized children. Really out there kind of conspiracy stuff. Jim Caviezel buys into this stuff 100%. He has said so publicly many times, which is troubling because the movie is about child trafficking. Okay, now he plays Tim Ballard, a real person. Tim Ballard claims to be a former U.S. federal government agent who left the government in frustration and began an organization that now rescues children and adults, mostly children, from trafficking around the world. Now, this is where the facts get hard to come by, because different fact checkers have come up with very different facts about Tim Ballard. Some things we definitely, by the way, if you get going to ever since this movie was announced, I've been checking out this guy's Wikipedia article, which is constantly being revised and stuff being added and taken out of it. It's sort of a battlefield between his supporters and his detractors. It appears that Tim Ballard was a federal government agent. One article I read said that when Homeland Security was asked if he had been an agent, they confirmed that he had been an employee, but that they could not confirm his role without his permission, which he had declined to give, which meant that they could not confirm or deny any of his claims about the work he had done there. Other fact checkers have said that this has all been verified, that he what his exact role was, which had to do with exposing human trafficking. Anyway, so Tim Ballard is a real person. Seems to have worked for the federal government. He definitely does run an organization now that absolutely positively has rescued people from being trafficked, both children and adults. At a bare minimum, 54 people we know of that he has rescued. He has also contracted with governments around the world to do stuff for them. But the organization is extremely controversial. Not every group that has worked with them is happy about the work that they have done for them. Some of the groups are very concerned about some of the claims made by his organization. Other groups are very concerned about the way they operate. In particular, apparently, one of the, I guess you'd call them a raid, one of the raids conducted by the organization that rescued people was broadcast live, apparently. And the people they were rescued were on camera, and so their identities were like out in the open, which is not cool. Tim Ballard runs an organization that rescues children from child trafficking and is being played by Jim Caviezel, who is a QAnon proponent who believes a conspiracy theory about child trafficking. Now, Tim Ballard himself has never endorsed QAnon. I want to be clear on that. But he's never condemned it either, as far as I can tell. I better put that in there. So, as far as the film itself is, I've read a lot about it. I have not actually seen it, largely because I don't know what to make of it, and I don't like putting money into stuff until I know what to make of it if it's controversial. Not that my $20 ticket's gonna make or break anybody's budget, but from what I've read, it seems like everything in the film, although fictionalized certainly, is pretty close to what actually happened. Some things have been dramatized. So the film is about a real person. It would appear that the events depicted actually happened, just have been slightly exaggerated or dramatized for the film. The movie is doing very well. The interesting thing is this movie was made in 2018. Every studio that looked at it refused to distribute it. So Angel Studios picked it up, and they distributed it. with their with their crowdfunding apparatus. They funded the distribution, and the movie beat Indiana Jones on opening weekend. So now everybody who has seen this movie, who has looked at it critically, has said this movie does not have any QAnon stuff in it. It does not mention QAnon. It doesn't promote any of QAnon theories. My concern is that it has been marketed directly to QAnon adherents, not, mostly by Jim Caviezel himself. Okay, but I don't know. The whole thing makes me very uncomfortable, and I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. So I just thought that, it's being talked about in certain circles, but it's not being talked about, I think, in the right circles. I'm not saying don't go see this movie. I just want you to know that this Jim Caviezel's involvement in it is troubling, and Angel Studios' willingness to work with Jim Caviezel, because when Jim Caviezel made the movie, that was 2018. The QAnon thing blew up dramatically afterwards. Okay, QAnon was already there, but things got much more complicated after the movie was made, and Angel Studios jumped into the fray after everything blew up. And I don't know, something about it gives me a bad vibe. But maybe I'm crazy, because after all, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a film critic, I'm not a historian. I'm just a guy with an opinion and a cheap webcam. All right, so like I said, next week I'm going to be on vacation, staycation, I should call it. My aunt's funeral is on Monday. Thank you, those of you who have prayed for that. And Tuesday I am going to go to one meeting here because it's an important meeting. But generally speaking, I will be in Communicado next week. But when I'm on staycation, Tracy appreciates my opinions. Thank you. Well, when I'm on staycation, when I go on vacation, when I go away, I have somebody on call in case of emergencies. So if somebody needs pastoral care, somebody can step in and do that. When I'm on staycation, I don't generally do that because I'm still reachable. I always have my cell phone on me. So there will not be somebody on call next week. I will be on call next week. So if you need anything, pastoral care, if something happens, feel free to give me a buzz. Don't forget to email me any questions you have about anything that we've talked about. And I will not use your name when we talk about your question unless you tell me it's okay to use your name when we talk about your questions. So that's all I have for you this week. Let's go ahead and close with the Serenity Prayer, shall we? Serenity Prayer, happy life. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Amen, folks. I'll see y'all maybe in 2 weeks, maybe a little bit later. I don't know. I'll see you online on Worship Sunday, some of you. And that's all.